jointer is such a menacing looking machine.
Hi, I'm Brian Benham and I run a design build firm here in Colorado where I design and build custom furniture, art, and architectural elements. And in today's shop class we are talking about how to use a jointer. Alright, so the main purpose of a jointer is to take a warped, curved, cupped, or just gross piece of wood and square it up so you have a nice, beautiful piece of wood to work with. Alright, so the first step to square up a board is to joint the face. So now the question is, which side of this board do I joint first? So I have a piece of walnut that's a little longer here to use as an example, and I always joint it so it goes across the jointer with the cup, the bulge of the cup facing up. And the reason why that is, if you ever remember back in math class where you had to graph a straight line, to be able to do that you had to have 2 points to connect. So if we look at this board, it's making contact on the table here and it's making contact on the table here. Now my workbench is a torsion box, so it's nice and flat. So this is a very accurate representation of how this board is cupped in the middle. So when I run it across the jointer, I am going to put one paddle on this side and one paddle on this side. And as I joint it, you're going to hear it take off some material here and then take off some material here. And with each pass, I'm going to be widening my reference points, my 2 dots to graph the line. So as I do this, this cup in the middle, that space is going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the whole board is referencing flat across the jointer. Now whenever I'm jointing, one thing I never want to do is press down in the middle. If you see this space here between the table and the board, when I press down in the middle, it flattens out. So if I were to put my pressure in the middle of the board as I run it across the jointer, it might make a nice, clean, flat, smooth face to it. But as soon as I let go, it's going to spring back up and my board is not going to be flat any longer. So always make sure you maintain your 2 points of contact on the outside edges. And then on longer boards where it's harder to reference, once you get a couple of good flat spots, then you're able to do the hand over hand thing and keep referenced on the outfeed side of the table. That will help make sure you get a nice flat board on long boards. So with each pass you can hear it remove some material, and with each pass it gets a little bit longer as it shortens up that space. You can hear that blank space get shorter and shorter as the board gets flatter and flatter. Right, and then as the board gets flatter and flatter, you can reposition your paddles so you're more evenly distributing pressure across the whole board on your final pass. All right, so as you noticed, it took several passes to do, and that's okay. You can adjust the depth of cut of your jointer if you want to speed that process up a little bit. And I'm going to cut out a few passes just so you don't get bored watching the same thing. So yeah, so it takes several passes. Just take your time and you'll end up with a nice flat face on one side to start to work from. All right, so now the reason why I don't do it with the cup facing this direction is because I don't have 2 points of contact to make my straight line. So if you join it in this direction, as you push across that blade, since you don't have 2 points of contact, there's no guarantee that you're going to be pushing that board in the same orientation across the blade. So you could just be making a nice, smooth, clean cut on this side, but without 2 points of contact to guarantee you have a straight line, you're just going to create a banana-shaped board. So don't joint your boards into bananas. All right, so now you have one side nice and flat and smooth. So the next step would be to create a parallel face on the other side. So as we just talked about not jointing your boards into bananas, you don't want to send this piece across the jointer because you have no guarantee that it's going to make it parallel to this other side. So that's when your planer comes into play. All right, so now that you have both faces nice, flat, and smooth, and they are parallel, it's time to pick an edge to joint square to this face. So the same thing applies. You want to set it down on a flat surface, and if it cups this way, this is the direction you want to joint it. If you have it upside down and it's cupping, as you can see, it's kind of rocking there. So if it's cupping this direction, you don't want to joint it that way because then you're going to create the banana effect. And to ensure that this edge is square to this face, I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping gentle pressure against the fence and down to the table. And I'm going to use the same technique as before. I'm going to put my pressure at the high spots or at the 2 points to where it touches the table to make sure I have my 2 points to create that straight line. All right, so the first pass I was holding out my high points, making sure I had good contact at the table all the way across and trying to put pressure up against the back fence. Now that I have this nice and straight, but I want to make sure that I'm perfectly square to this edge, because last time I was concentrating on more on my 2 points, so then my second pass is going to be concentrating more on keeping it towards the fence. So that way it comes out perfectly straight this way and square the face to the edge, square to the fence. All right, whenever you're working, doing this kind of work, you want to keep checking to make sure that you're making good progress. All right, so I have my straight edge. Make sure I'm nice and flat all the way across. And then my square. All right, so this, and this are all square to each other, these corners. So now I have this edge right here I need to square up. And to make sure that this edge is parallel to this edge, I'm going to use the table saw, and this edge that I've jointed is going to go up against the table saw fence. All right, so I've checked to make sure my blade is square to the table and my blade is perpendicular to the fence. That will guarantee you everything comes out nice and square. All right, so that all turned out nice and square. So now I have a perfectly square board that I can start building my furniture with. Now let's jump over to another board and talk about troubleshooting if you're not getting perfect results. All right, so let's look at this board here. So hopefully you can see that really nasty rough surface that I just ran across the joiner, and it's all torn out. And if you see these ribs right here left over from the blade, that's not a desirable look either. So how do we solve those things? All right, so if you look at the grain of this wood, the grain is diving out of the wood in this direction. So the fibers are running this direction. So the cutter is spinning in this direction. So the blade comes up and it grabs into the ends of those fibers and just rips them off instead of cuts them off. So as you push along here, it's just going to rip all those fibers off because the blade is coming up this direction and just tearing into the wood. So to help prevent that, if you turn your board around, so now the fibers are diving this direction and the cutter is going that same direction. So as you push it across, it will result in a much smoother cut. Even with the helical head, that could still be an ugly way to joint that board. So it's still a good idea to pay attention to what the general direction of the wood is to stack the cards in your favor no matter what blade you're using. So that solves the tear out issue, but we still have these little ripples. So there's a couple things that can cause these ripples to happen. Most commonly, you're pushing too fast. So if you push at a slower pace, you'll get a much smoother cut. So sometimes it might take me 4 or 5 passes to get a nice straight edge on a board, but that last pass, I'm gonna go nice and slow. That way I get a nice, clean, smooth cut. So another reason why you might have these scalloped edges, because the top of the table might be lower than the top of the tooth. In most joiner instruction manuals that I've seen, they have a troubleshooting guide that will help you determine if you're getting a weird taper on the board or weird scallops or some kind of inconsistent cut to how to set this joiner up better. So I'm not going to do a joiner setup video. There's other videos. I will link to one that I think is a good one on how to set up a joiner. There's no need to recreate that. But yeah, so that is how to joint a board. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you got some value out of that. If you did, please consider subscribing. I don't ask very often, but the YouTube algorithm shows no mercy. So if you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when the next video comes out. Thank you very much for watching.